What's up guys, Dare here, back with a second installment of grading the ADPs. Last week we talked about the first round. This week we are going into the second round. A lot of good picks here. I think this is when you start to have players with a little bit more question marks. The first round's pretty easy. You basically take whatever player falls to you at your draft position because they're all ranked so accurately. I mean, I guess 7 through 12 there could be a little wiggle room, but you basically know what you're going to get in those ranges. So I do have a lot of information I have to go over, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Before I do though, if you haven't checked out the Facebook group yet, make sure to join it. We are about 2/3 full, so get in quick. If you haven't looked at the website yet, it's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Check it out. Check out the premium benefits on there. Check out some of our articles and our rankings. Okay, that's enough about that. So we're going to get into the first player here of the second round. Pick 13, that's Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Now, just straight up, I'm going to tell you it's a bit too early for our liking, so let's talk about him a little bit and why. One of his greatest strengths is his route running ability, and this guy was super underrated ever since he came into the league. Even in draft day, he said he played with a chip on his shoulder. I think he went like early second round too, so that's really saying something. Now, what does he have going for him? Well, the Saints have a really mediocre defense at best. Nothing from last year is going to be changing this year, and you already know Breeze is probably going to throw for over 4,500 yards. That's basically a lot. Now, even with Adrian Peterson and Mark Ingram, that's just not enough for me to believe that this passing game will diminish. If Drew Brees is at the helm, this is going to be a pass-first offense. So what else did change? I mean, huge difference from last year. Brandon Cooks is now gone. So what does that mean? That means Michael Thomas is going to get more targets. Michael Thomas already had a stud year last year. So with more targets, you instantly think he's a lock for top 5 type of production. Well, it doesn't really work that way. Yeah, Michael Thomas will more than likely see an increase in target share. I could see his 122 targets from last year turning into somewhere around 150. And I know all this is sounding really good, right? The one thing is, his catch rate was just absolutely ridiculous. He had a 76% catch rate, which is literally good for second best ever by a rookie receiver. You've heard us say it before, and you'll hear us say it again. Sophomore slump is a thing. You can't put all that much weight on it, but it always has to be in the back of your mind. If I'm ever unsure about two players and one's a second-year player and one's a veteran, as long as the veteran's not too old, I will normally take the proven commodity. And that's just not what Michael Thomas is. Yeah, he has the upside, but he's just unproven. Sophomore slump's real, so you have to factor that in. Now, just going back to his catch rate, if that catch rate stayed the same on those 150 targets that I just projected him at, that would turn into 114 receptions. And with his yards per catch likely to increase this year with Brandon Cooks leaving, that would project him to like over 1,400, 1,500 yards. That's just really not realistic. Yeah, that may be his ceiling, but it's just not realistic. A solid catch rate is probably somewhere closer to about 65%. For reference, Odell Beckham has averaged 60% throughout the past 2 years, so I think that's pretty fair. Now, keep in mind, catch rate and drop rate are two completely different metrics, so make sure not to get those confused. So just because his catch rate decreases doesn't mean his drop rate is going to increase. No, when we're saying a reduction in catch rate, it's mostly because if Cooks is leaving town, defenses won't be stretching the field as much. Ginn is going to play the role that Cooks did, but he really is nowhere near as good as Cooks. Ginn is actually old. He's been in the league for like 11 years, and he's never eclipsed 800 receiving yards. For a deep threat guy, that is pretty bad. Now, Michael Thomas is clearly from this point forward going to be getting the main coverage. A player's catch rate directly correlates to a reduction in fantasy points per target, and it really makes sense if you think about it, right? The math actually comes out to about a half a point every 20% in reduction. So I'm saying he's going to go from 76 to somewhere around 65. That would lose him approximately just over 0.25 points per target, so about a quarter of a point per target. If you slot that out for the whole season, that's about 38 fantasy points less throughout the entire season. Now, he will make up for most of that by an increase in his target share and his red zone capabilities, but this is just some of the factors that you have to consider when the opposing teams have a full year tape on you and you lose a high-end receiver like Brandon Cooks. Yeah, Michael Thomas is a solid wide receiver 1. I definitely would prefer if I had him on my team as a wide receiver 2. We just think 13 overall is just a little too early for him. That slots him out at about wide receiver 7. Now, that's where he finished last year in PPR. There's just not enough room to improve on. At best, he's going to return value this year. So let me clarify a little bit more about the catch rate thing and the points per target. So you can actually slot out a correlation directly from how many fantasy points you get per target. Catch rate directly impacts that. I mean, if you're catching 75% of your balls and 100 are thrown your way, you're going to get 75 fantasy points. However, on the flip side, if you're only catching 65% of the balls, you're only going to get 65 fantasy points out of 100 targets, as opposed to that 75 you would get if you had the higher catch rate. It's basically a lock to say that he is going to lose out on his catch rate, but he's still a good pick nonetheless. I think I'm going on too much on one player. There's no way I'm going to get through all 12 of these guys at this rate. So let me just jump right into the next one. This is definitely where things get a little bit more interesting. We are actually using Fantasy Football Calculator to get all of our ADPs right now, at least for these videos, to keep them consistent while ESPN is changing every day. The next player we have is Ajayi out of Miami. He's not a bad pick. We prefer him as a mid-second round pick, but right now he is literally the second player picked in the second round. That's a little high, especially considering this is a guy who has a few question marks, to say the least. So the first thing worth mentioning is he has some knee issues. We can't be 100% sure that his knees can hold up. That is something to keep in mind, but up until this point, he hasn't proven us otherwise yet, so we can't hold that too much accountable until we start to see that on the field. What's the good in this pick? Well, he's averaged 4.9 yards per carry through 15 games last year. That's pretty impressive. Yes, it's a little inflated, but impressive nonetheless. Almost 5 yards per carry. That's hard to find in this league unless you're someone like Jamal Charles back when he was in his prime. Another thing to factor in, this offense can stay completely competitive. I have a lot of faith in Adam Gase. I think Tannehill will be the only thing that potentially holds this offense back. If he's not able to develop through Adam Gase, I just really don't have faith in him as a player at all. I think he's a smart guy. I think he has the opportunity to do it and the ability to do it, but he hasn't really taken those steps at this point in his career, and he's really starting to get at that point where you're wondering if he has it in him. So back to Ajayi and this Dolphins offense, they actually only lost one game when they gave him 15 plus rushes per game. That game was against the Patriots, so you can't really blame him. Adam Gase is smart. He's going to look at that and he's going to try to capitalize on it. You can make a direct correlation to it. Everyone knows winning teams run the ball. Another factor, he has no competition. I think that's personally one of the reasons why he is such a lock for the second round right now, because a lot of people are worried about running back competitions, the question marks, the injury risks, and when you have a guy that has nobody breathing down his neck, that's definitely going to boost his value. It's safe to say he's going to get fed this year, and he is involved in the passing game. He caught 27 balls out of the backfield last year, and I could see that number increasing this year. That's all the good, though. We have to talk about the bad and why we think he's slightly overrated at this point. He did play in 15 games last season, but I personally think he is relatively unproven. We don't need to tell you this, but it's a fact. 49% of his rushing yards came in 3 games, just 3 out of the 15 games. I can't tell you how important that is. The yards are going to be your weekly baseline of points, and obviously the receptions in a PPR league. If you're not getting yards, you have to start relying on touchdowns. If you don't get the yards or the touchdowns, and maybe you only get a few receptions, you're not even going to be in the top 24 most weeks. I'm definitely not a fan of any player who gets under 60 rushing yards in over half their games, and that's exactly what he did last year. His touchdowns kind of did flip-flop between his yardage games, so that kept him relatively consistent last year, but when you're making this pick, you're banking on improvement from last year. The big picture is you will have a top running back. The only thing is he could be the Brandon Cooks type of running back where he's boom or bust week to week. I've done a lot of mock drafts and taken him before. The teams look good. We do like him, but prefer he be taken a little bit later on. Someone we'd like to take and like to see in this position ahead of him is someone probably like Jordan Howard. I'd definitely take Jordan Howard over Ajayi, but we haven't reached him yet. We'll talk about him in a little bit. The next player on this list is DeMarco Murray, coming in at 15 overall. Now, there's really not too much to say about Murray that's not already out there. He's a good pick here. We also prefer Murray a little bit later as well. I think a fair pairing for him with a first and second round pick would be probably someone like Mike Evans or AJ Green, someone in that range. You could throw Jordy in there as well. That would slot him out pick 17 in a snake draft, since Mike Evans, AJ Green, they're all going around that 7 to 10 range. Now, DeMarco Murray used to be known as more of an injury-prone style of player, but that's in the past, and I really don't think we can hold that against him, at least not in the recent years. I've literally seen this guy play with a giant block of a cast on his hand and be very productive, so you know he's going to try to make it on the field. So the Tennessee Titans have a great offensive line. I don't need to throw stats at you on his production from last year or his yards per carry throughout his career. He's DeMarco Murray. He's proven as long as he's getting touches, he will be productive. Remember, DeMarco Murray is still only a few years removed from leading the league in rushing. Yeah, he's a bit older, that's true, but we saw no signs that he can't rush and rush hard. So one thing that's important when remembering this DeMarco Murray pick, it should give you a little boost in confidence when drafting him, and that's the money. The Titans are eating up a big contract right now. All this talk about Derrick Henry taking over after being productive as a role player just doesn't really make sense. You do have to factor in though that once the cap hit is less of a burden, which should happen after this year, they won't feel so forced to put the mileage on him. You can guarantee if they're paying for Murray, they're going to get their money's worth out of him, and so far they have. You know, that definitely changes if Murray gets hurt. We've seen it before. The hot hand always ends up winning these running back battles. So if he goes out for any period of time and the Titans, they're competitive, they could potentially win this division. I think they're favorite in Vegas right now to win that division. So if Henry comes in and he's the hot hand and they're in the hunt for the playoffs, there is definitely a strong chance that Henry could get the majority of the carries. Even if not and DeMarco Murray stays healthy and he is going to get the majority of the touches, it's really hard to imagine that DeMarco Murray finishes this season with the same level of production he did last year. Top 10, definitely. Top 5 is probably a stretch. Nick did a video yesterday and it's basically on the range of outcomes. In 2016, DeMarco Murray had the epitome of optimal outcome for his situation. If everyone knew coming into last year that the Titans would feed Murray the ball the way that they did after investing a second round pick in Derrick Henry, do you really think Murray would have been taken in the 4th round of the 2016 fantasy draft? No, he'd be drafted much higher. So those are the range of outcomes you always project. We all know Derrick Henry's good, yeah, but will he take over the job if Murray's healthy? Nah, I wouldn't really worry about it. Even if Murray went down and they switched to more of a timeshare, the Titans run so much that at the very worst, he's still going to be a viable starting option each week. It's a good pick. We'd like him slightly later, but good pick overall. So I would definitely say this next player coming in at 16 is the best value that we've listed so far, and this is T.Y. Hilton. He's coming off his best fantasy performance of his career. He ended the season at wide receiver 5 in 2016, and now he's being drafted as wide receiver 7. Now that value based on drafting is completely fair on his tier because players like AJ Green and Julio both didn't finish in the top 5 due to injury, but it's very clear those are better fantasy players to own. T.Y. Hilton's such an interesting player to have as a wide receiver 1 because he really doesn't offer much touchdown upside at all. He's also never going to be a 100 reception receiver. He's literally reliant on big plays as shown by his career 15.7 yards per catch average. That's just massive. He's an easy player to slot out right now because there's really no new additions that they've added on offense and no new true weapons leaving. One thing you definitely have to keep in mind is he plays significantly better when Moncrief is not on the field. Throughout the time Moncrief was healthy, Hilton only caught 1 touchdown pass while Moncrief was on the field. And his fantasy points per game, and the difference in his fantasy points per game is just incredible. Without Moncrief, he averaged 21 points per game. With Moncrief, he only averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game. These are PPR numbers, but with a 13.5 points per game average, that would only be good for about wide receiver 20. Now, Moncrief did battle injuries last year, but the 2 years before that, he had never missed a game. Now, those stats, they go both ways though, because his 21 points per game would have been good for first. So you potentially have a player that could have a ceiling who could be the #1 fantasy player, which is still a little bit of a stretch because there are very good wide receivers out there, but that sample size was through an 8-game average. So I think an 8-game sample size is enough to make that statement. Hilton offers huge game-breaking weeks for yardage and is essentially a lock for 1,000 yards. I don't think anyone can question that. He won't ever though have that TD upside. I mean, even when Andrew Luck threw 40 touchdowns in 2014, Hilton only had 7. So unless Andrew Luck throws 80 touchdowns, I don't think you can expect double digits from Hilton. For 2017, we have him slotted out at 6 touchdowns, which I think is more than fair for this player. If you do end up picking Hilton, though, you definitely have to bundle him in with some safe floor picks at the wide receiver position. Hilton's floor is very low on a week-to-week basis. He's going behind Jordy, and trust me, we definitely like Jordy better than him, but he is still a tier ahead of the rest. He's a great value at this position. If you are in this spot and you're wondering if you should take Hilton, pull the trigger on him. Okay, so next up, coming in at 17th overall is Jordan Howard of the Bears. This is a great second round running back target. We like him a ton compared to his current ADP. Yeah, he's on a team with a bad offense. That's really the only reason why you're getting a good deal on him. Let's get real. If he was on the Packers, he'd probably be drafted by Antonio Brown. Yeah, he's not a good pass catcher, so he probably is better in standard, but you really can't give him too much of a knock in PPR just because the level of talent and production he could provide. There's always that slight misconception I've been hearing, and it's this whole 3-down back role. When people refer to a player and say that he's not a 3-down back, normally that means they have a dedicated pass-catching running back on the team. Some examples are players like Chris Thompson of the Redskins, Shane Vereen of the Giants, Kadeem Carey for the Bears. Good example for this case. Just because they have pass catching options doesn't mean they won't catch passes. A running back, if he's not running the ball, is either doing two things. He's blocking for the quarterback to buy some time in the pocket, or he's running a route on 1st and 2nd down. Even when he blocks for the quarterback, he still is one of the check down options. He is going to be catching passes. Now I know he's not going to be a 50+ reception guy. His 29 receptions from last year are repeatable, maybe even able to be improved upon. It's not something that he is skilled at. The amount of drops that he had were really ridiculous, but this could be part of his game if he really works on it this offseason and gets better. When the team is going to be playing from behind and Howard's your best weapon, I really think they're not going to take him off the field as much as possible. So some things I've been hearing about Jordan Howard throughout this offseason are basically, I've heard comparisons that he's this year's Todd Gurley. The comparison makes sense. Subpar QB play with no receiving threats. It's a valid concern, and I am concerned with it too, but I do think Glennon is a better quarterback than Goff and Keenum. I also think Kevin White and Meredith offer much more upside than Britt and Tavon Austin did last year, so I think they're going to be okay. I'm not saying they will be ahead in many games this year, and that's another concern for running backs, but you also can't forget that they were down in 10 of 13 games that he was the starter. I'm sure you've heard it all, so long story short, we like him at this spot. Hopefully he falls lower rather than moves up so we can get an even better deal on him. The next player we have is also coming in at a value, and that's Dez Bryant of the Dallas Cowboys. Now this is a very interesting pick. On one hand, he has immense touchdown upside. It's Dez Bryant. He literally is one of the best receivers in the NFL, high pointing the ball and winning those contested catches. On the other hand, he has a super tough schedule, and it's been years since he's been fantasy relevant, mostly due to injuries. I also have a feeling his ADP could potentially fall lower. I've been seeing him go in the late 2nd round in almost every draft. Right now, he's taken off the board on Fantasy Football Calculator at 18 overall, and that's even considering that there are so many Cowboys fans everywhere, and they always love to draft their players. So if he's falling in drafts, you know some Cowboys fans are passing up on him too. Now here's the thing with Dez. Right now we're in June. Nobody is talking that much about the schedule. The schedule is part of the reason we're so high on Elliott this year. He's our #1 overall pick in standard scoring formats. The tough schedule and the inexperience at quarterback will definitely be helped by a great run game. Now I know Dak had an incredible year last year, but I need to see it one more time so I can truly be sold on his future. Come August, everyone is going to be looking at the schedule a lot more. It'll really change what people's opinions are and where they're drafting their players. When they realize how tough it could be against a 2nd-year quarterback and that could impact Dez and cause him to fall, I'm going to jump all over that. Some of the matchups he has: Broncos, Cardinals, Seahawks, Rams, Chiefs, and obviously they play the Eagles and Giants twice. That's 9 of 16 matchups that are truly unfavorable. They also play the Falcons. They're a sleeper defense for us too, and I didn't even count them in that list. Now Dez's production can be made up in the other games. He does have some easy matchups, including the 49ers and some other scrub defenses, but it really doesn't leave much excitement for you and your fantasy team on Sunday. If you're investing in a 2nd-round pick and you know he's going up against the Broncos' tough pass defense, it's really hard to get excited when that's one of your best players you're looking forward to watching. If he falls in the 3rd round though, I don't care what the schedule is. Just get him on your team. He's a lock for 1,000 yards with that upside in the TD department. Okay, this next player I don't have too much to speak on, and that's Amari Cooper. He's coming in at 19. I don't think we will own too much of Amari Cooper, but I know that Amari Cooper is a guy that a lot of people love to have on their team. He's part of this really gray area of the late 2nd round where it really starts to get a little hazy. Look, I love this offense, and I can't wait to watch him play, but let's be honest, Michael Crabtree is the only one they look for in the red zone. He's also the only one that really has value and upside based on the ADP. Cooper really has to take a step up if he's going to meet his value. I know he's good for about 1,000 to 1,200 yards and 5 TDs, but his ADP really doesn't leave him much wiggle room to exceed that value. I think fantasy owners really got excited when he posted 4 monster yardage games in the first half of the season, but he really just followed him up with a bunch of dud games. We don't expect anything to change. This is another one of those situations where the offense hasn't had much change. Yeah, they brought in Marshawn Lynch, but is that really changing anything from what they had last season? If anything, they should be able to keep plays alive more often, but they're getting better on defense. I really just don't see this being any more positive of a game script for Amari Cooper throughout the season. Now, one other thing I always look at is, can he clean up maybe his catch rate, his drop rate? Are there some metrics that he was not doing well in. Is he working on them? And no, he already cleaned them up. And now he's coming off the board at wide receiver 10. He was wide receiver 13 last year. I'd like him potentially as the last pick in the second round. If you get him in the third, this is another situation like Dez. If you could get him in the third, I definitely like that. But when you're talking middle of the second round, I think that's just a little bit of exceeding value. Whenever I'm trying to draft a player, I always want them to exceed the place I draft them in. Amari Cooper just seems like it's going to be the same story as last time. It's going to be fun to have him on your team, especially when he has big games, but it's going to be disappointing when he gets those 2 for 28 performances. Okay, so who do we have next? We have, oh boy, we have Rob Gronkowski coming in at 20. Who is drafting Rob Gronkowski right now at 20? I mean, it's safe to say Rob Gronkowski will probably always be a first or third round pick until the day he retires, but right now coming in at pick 20 doesn't really leave you much options. If you drafted him and you're on pick 20, you probably have a pick like Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, or Julio Jones, and you're on the wraparound of the snake draft in a 12-man league. I could see a situation where that could be a good pick there for you, but for us, it's definitely mid-third round pick only. I'm going to hard cut it off there. He's got just such an insane amount of injury risk. I can't think of a player that's more injury prone than him. Maybe you could make the case for Watkins, but we have a much larger sample size on Gronk. He blows him out of the park in my book. Now, the Patriots have so many weapons. This isn't a trio anymore with Amendola, Edelman, and Gronk. Those days are over. This offense is much more dynamic right now. And one thing that Bill Belichick's good at, he is super skilled at exploiting matchups. And a lot of the players are super unique. They're going to have more than enough options to win without him. Now, we're not saying that he will be benched for games or anything, but a 60% snap count on average is in the realm of possibility. The Pats know if they have everyone healthy by the end of the season, they will potentially win that Super Bowl. Now, with Gronk, he can definitely be game-breaking since he posts insane numbers at the position that is so weak in fantasy football. Even a 60% snap count is going to be top 5, maybe even number 1. If you want him there, go ahead and take him, but I can promise you that we will not consider him until the third. Bottom line. Okay, so the next player coming in at 21st overall is Todd Gurley. This is another interesting one, and it's not a bad pick at all. I actually like this pick a little bit. A ton of people are down on Gurley after last year. I'm talking a ton. We're not the highest on Gurley, but we love taking advantage of players who come off bad years. That's when you can really maximize the value. Every year we have bounce back players, and they become some of the best value you can ever find in a draft on players who had underperformed the year before. One thing about Gurley is there is a significant drop off in talent, and he is clearly above the tier below him. Excluding Fournette, we would put Fournette clearly in the same tier as Gurley, but the rest, severe drop-off in skill. Now, he is a top 5 running back in the league for sure, talent-wise, but sometimes that just doesn't get the job done. We've said it before with Jordan Howard, but you don't normally want an RB on a team with a bad offense. Not only do they have a bad offense, but they just don't score. They have so many drives that have 3 or 4 plays. They don't even get a chance to get going. And this year, they will have plenty more of those. Nothing's going to change too dramatically. But the one thing that will change, Jeff Fisher is now out. Thank goodness. I never liked Jeff Fisher. He was given way too long and made way too many mistakes. He will always be known in my book as Fisher 500. With the new coaching staff, everything changes, and Gurley can't really get worse than he did last year. He had a 3.2 yards per carry average, which is truly Trent Richardson status, but he did finish his RB15, which is pathetic for the amount of carries he had, but it's safe to say that that's his floor. Now, I do think he may take a dip in targets because he did finish in the top 12 in the amount of targets he received, but I still think 30 to 40 receptions is very plausible. A lot of concerns that I'm hearing on the internet is that they brought in Lance Dunbar, and that's concerning people. I know a lot of people consider Lance Dunbar a huge threat to him in the passing game, but honestly, I just don't at all. All Lance Dunbar can do is catch, but that doesn't mean he's going to be featured in that role. Dunbar is literally unproven in my book. When you have a career high of 21 receptions, that's just not enough to scare me. The Rams lost Benny Cunningham, who's much more proven and has had way more receptions from him on his career, and that didn't impact Todd Gurley at all. So to tell me this less skilled player is going to come in and beat out Todd Gurley for his receptions, just, I don't know, get out of here with that. Don't be afraid to grab Gurley at this ADP. Don't expect him to produce game-breaking weeks, but his role in this offense will definitely keep him relevant in the 2017 season. Okay, Leonard Fournette. Get your popcorn out, guys. This one's going to be a good one. He comes in at 22. Yep, 22. So we've been getting a lot of questions in the comments and also the Facebook group about Leonard Fournette, and the truth is we just won't be taking any of them this year. I know the combine translates poorly to most players, aka Jordan Howard, but even still it has to raise some questions. I am still surprised that after a poor performance in the combine he was still taken by the Jaguars. Kind of baffles me. His marks were really low. The only thing he really had going for him was the good 40 time coming in at 4.51, but all his burst scores were extremely low. His comparisons coming into it were that he was like a power back like AP or Derrick Henry, yet his jump numbers were closer to that of an offensive lineman than those two players. Speaking of offensive lines, the Jags have a pitiful offensive line. Bortles was the third most sacked rookie quarterback of all time. The line has not improved much since then. Add that on to the fact that Leonard Fournette is not a strong receiver, nor is he a strong pass blocker. Let me read you some of the reports that came out on his official scouting report, and you tell me if he sounds like a good fit for this Jags offense. When LSU's blocking was poor in 2016, Fournette was unable to create on his own as often as he did in previous seasons. The second one, limited experience as a receiver. Only 40 career receptions. He dropped 8 of 48 catchable targets in his whole career. That's a good sample size, but that's not a lot of balls. Fournette stayed in to pass block just 132 times in his career, less than 30% of all passing plays. The last one, physicality as a runner and blocker may cause concerns about his durability. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read all those things, I'm just checking off the list of things that are going to be involved in his game with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it's not looking pretty. It doesn't seem like the match made in heaven everyone's making it out to seem. The Jaguars, they're definitely going to be playing from behind a lot. And if he's not a good pass blocker or a good receiver, the whole offense will suffer. Then you have to factor in the small fact that the Jaguars haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher since Maurice Jones-Drew did it, and even when Maurice Jones-Drew did it for the first time, he didn't accomplish that goal until his 4th season. I'm not saying Fournette doesn't have the upside. He definitely has a shot at reaching the 1,000-yard mark this year, but when I'm looking at drafting rookie running backs, I always want to get a good value on them. Why? Because they're unproven. I should get a good value on them. Ezekiel Elliott last year was a different situation, but I don't see the upside in Fournette. Too many question marks. Doesn't seem like a good fit. I'll be avoiding him, but you make your own choice on that. So we do have 2 more, not too much to talk about on them, so I'll try to run through them quick. Number 23, DeAndre Hopkins out of Houston. Now this may surprise you, but we're definitely good with Hopkins at this pick of 23. Brock was the reason that really held him back. Like we said, we do like to target players who are coming off a bad year, use recency bias to get a steal on him. I've been seeing him drop a lot in drafts, mostly because 1 out of 12 fantasy owners probably had him last year and were disappointed. Add the more people who traded for him as a buy low candidate and were severely disappointed, and that's a lot of pissed off fantasy owners. I can tell you one thing, Hopkins will reach 1,000 yards. He was only 46 yards away from reaching that last year with Brock, and we've seen he has top 5 talent upside. The guy literally posted 1,500 yards. That's elite status, and he's in the prime of his career. He's only 25 years old. We're not predicting he posts those numbers that he did 2 years ago, but he will improve, and that's enough for him to reach value with some upside. No one's pushing him for targets. Hopkins still doesn't have a long-term contract. His deal expires at the end of this season, so he is going to be playing for money, and if you follow DeAndre Hopkins, he likes to spend his money. He was the one who wore the Yeezy cleats, if you remember that. He's going to play hard this year, and without Brock holding him back, he has a chance to have a top 10 season. I would definitely take him and pair him with a player like Le'Veon Bell or David Johnson. Odds are if you had that picks 1 to 3, you're probably on your second wraparound in the snake draft and could target Hopkins as your wide receiver 1. Wouldn't be a bad pick for you. Okay, so the final player in the second round based on ADP from Fantasy Football Calculator is Lamar Miller of the Texans. So we're going back-to-back Texans here, and straight up I'll tell you, Lamar Miller is going too high. I think if you gave me a choice, ADP aside, and told me you can only have one on your team, Crowell or Miller, that'd be a tough choice, and Crowell is available much later. The big factor here is Dante Foreman. He was drafted in the 3rd round, and this guy is massive. He's listed at 6'1", 249. That's Derrick Henry status. If you haven't seen the picture with Derrick Henry standing next to Eddie Lacy, go look it up right now. It's hilarious. It just shows you how big Derrick Henry is, and this guy combats him in size. Derrick Henry may be a little bit bigger. I think he's an inch taller and like 6 pounds heavier, but these guys are just massive. What does that tell you? He's going to be a 1st and 2nd down kind of guy. So one thing I never understood though about Lamar Miller was that he was healthy his whole career, but all the reports you had from the Dolphins camp was saying about limiting his workload. We have to limit his workload, giving him limited reps, split carries, stuff like that. I always wondered why they would do that to a guy who's always been healthy. I seem like that's kind of the thing for injury prone players. You want to limit their snaps so they can remain healthy. But it was clear by the end of the season, Miller just broke down last year. It was clear he was limited for a reason, and the Dolphins were just able to find that out before actually having to deal with the consequences. The Texans have already came out and said that they're going to be limiting his touches, so there's no secret to it. This draft pick was for a reason. Even when healthy, he really wasn't all that productive either, so his upside is clearly capped. I wouldn't even be surprised if Dante Foreman just gets the goal line duties just because of his size alone. As long as he doesn't fumble, I think that's probably going to happen. And then the final factor is just that some of the other running backs that are listed ahead of him that are unproductive, I can still get behind, but when you have a talented back breathing down your neck, it's just a different story. Long story short, there are other running backs out there that have a lower ADP that we feel provide better value, so we don't really like him at 24. Maybe we'd revisit him in the 3rd round, but at 24, that's just a little too pricey for me. Alright, so that's going to do it for the 2nd round ADP draft review. This video has already gone on way too long, so just going to close it up real quick. If you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, join it while it's still open. If you haven't checked out the website, do that as well. If you liked the video, slap that like button. Other than that, thanks for watching, and we will catch you on the next one.